In this video, I'm going to be covering the best and worst of Draft in 2025. There were 6 sets this year, so there's a ton to get to, and let's dive in. First, an overview of what this video is all about. We'll go through some set overviews, so if you didn't play one of the sets or you need a little bit of a reminder, you can kind of understand what Draft in 2025 was all about. Then I'll be ranking all of the sets from the year. I will go through the award ceremony for top common of the year, top rare, things like that. There will be wins and fails, where I talk about some of the best and worst things from the designs of the set this year, focusing more on the positive because that's how I roll. And then we'll finish off with hopes for 2026 and the slate of sets that are coming up. Okie doke, so first set overview is for Ether Drift, the first set of the year. If I had to summarize this one, I would say slow and steady wins the race. It was a race car set. There was the mechanic start your engines, which you found on cards like Momentum Breaker, where you really want to get up to max speed because a lot of your cards cared about max speed, especially in the more aggressive decks, but you would much rather be in the defensive role in this format. Green was very strong. The card draw and value things were very good. A card like Thundering Broodwagon was a really strong top-end card. There were lots of vehicles in this set, and at uncommon or common, none better than Thundering Broodwagon, which just came in, got you value, was a giant threat. Stock Up was exactly the sort of card you were looking for in this format as well, getting you tons of card advantage and helping you even get some selection as well to find exactly what you needed for the given scenario and just outvalue your opponents, which is what Ether Drift was mostly about. Next up, we went back to Tarkir, and if I had to summarize this one, I would say just a Temur dragon living in a Boros world. Boros aggro, sometimes splashing black to go full Mardu, which is red, white, black, was a premier strategy in this format, but you could also go into more of the late game scenarios, especially with the Temur deck. So Frontline Rush is kind of iconic of the red, white aggro strategy. You would go wide, you could like build a big board state, and then you try to end the game quickly. And then Karakik Guardian is kind of on the other side of things with the Temur Dragon / late game Temur decks that could kind of just outvalue opponents. So if you got to the late game, you were going to be in great shape. Then Dragonstorm Globe kind of represents a renegade faction where you kind of play more towards the Karakik Guardian type of things, but you would just kind of play all 5 colors, play Dragonstorm Globes, play dragons, and you would just end up in a really good late game world as well. So Dragonstorm Globe was one of the more unique decks from that format once it was discovered, but generally there were the 2 camps of red, white aggro, sometimes splashing black, Temur Dragons, sometimes splashing other things to play more late game, and then there was some 5 color stuff involved as well, which you would maybe expect from a Tarkir set. And overall, it was a really cool homage to the format. Nice to get back to that plane. Next up was Final Fantasy. Now this is how you Universes Beyond is how I would describe this set. In a format where you could play Magitech Infantries and be rewarded for just drafting as many of those as you could, and also play Omega Heartless Evolution and play tons of towns for a late game ramp strategy in the same format, as well as a fantastic blue-red spells deck that cares about casting non-creature spells, when all 3 of those archetypes are well supported and a host of other archetypes as well, you know that you're in a pretty good situation. One of the interesting things about Final Fantasy was that none of its mechanics were really too complicated. None of them were like, oh, look at me, this is the mechanic of the set. It was more so just that the mechanics were very solid. They felt very magic-y, even though this was a Universes Beyond set. There was lots of choices to be made. There was lots of diversity in the decks that you could draft. Very well balanced overall, a home run of a set, very popular for a reason. Next up was Edge of Eternities, back to an in-universe Magic set. If I had to describe this one, I would just say super solid set and spaceships. The spacecrafts in this set were a unique innovation, a new card type. They didn't necessarily play out the best, but that was because they didn't really want to overtune them, it felt like. There were a couple of really good ones, like Fel Graveship, gets you some value, you station it up, you get a flying lifelinker. Oftentimes, though, there was some tension in whether you wanted to just attack your opponent or you wanted to station your spacecraft. There were some rewards for tapping your creatures, things like that. So there was some cute design space there, but generally the spaceships weren't super powerful, and so it didn't have as big of an impact on the set and how it played out as maybe it could have. There were also some really cool designs like lander tokens, with a card like Galactic Wayfarer being an all-star common. Just a really nice, smooth mechanic, helps you hit your land drops, helps you fix. It ended up really adding some interesting play space. And then a card like Cryogen Relic was just really interesting to play with. Gave you a whole host of synergies if you like sacrificed it to something else, you would draw a card. It was just like a nice card advantage engine that was just kind of a fun card to play with, and a pretty interesting one to like build around in your decks. Sometimes there were some good synergy pieces to go with it. So those are the sorts of the cards that come to mind for Edge of Eternities. Definitely another set where red-white fell a bit flat, and so that definitely leads to different gameplay elements when you don't have like the premier aggressive color combination being a real player in the format. So definitely another thing to think about with Edge of Eternities. Next up was Spider-Man. This is a set that I would describe with one sentence as how not to Universes Beyond. There was only 5 archetypes. It was designed for Pick 2 draft. There was, as you can see, a bit of tension between actual Spider-Man cards like Spider Manifestation, Spider-Girl, Legacy Hero, and then you see Terrelay and Tropic Hunger because there were different versions of the cards on Arena, which definitely added some dissonance to the format when you were playing it. And just speaking of these cards, a card like Spider Manifestation was absolutely fantastic and a hybrid mana card, so you could play it in tons of different decks in this format, but there were only like 5 archetypes really supported, so that makes all of the like decks feel a little bit more samey. It was a smaller set. They didn't really dedicate the time and resources to make this into a full set from the get-go. They kind of expanded it later, and I don't want to go on too long about how this set was not a success. It was pretty obviously not a success, but basically that was Spider-Man in a nutshell. Definitely something that they'll have to learn from doing Universes Beyond in the future. Next up was Avatar, which was perfect mechanics for a lovely set. That's how I would describe Avatar. The airbend mechanic, the firebending mechanic, the earthbend mechanic, waterbending was also a good mechanic. I only wanted to show 3 cards for symmetry purposes, but I'll get to waterbending a little bit later in this video. But basically the mechanics were really lovely. They all felt unique, which is something that is kind of, they had a lot of pretty good mechanics this year, but this set in particular, all 4 of the mechanics didn't really resemble past mechanics in a very major way, just a little bit, but the fact that they all fit very well with the Avatar themes was really, really nice, and I thought that really contributed to making this a fun set to play, because if you're a fan of the Avatar franchise, which I am, it really felt nice to have such good mechanics, because we saw in Final Fantasy they didn't really have tons of like really hyper specific mechanics. It was more general things like giving you optionality with your cards or things like that. But in this set, the mechanics were a big part of it, and they all played out really, really nicely and felt really emblematic of what Avatar is all about. So I think that contributed to making this a lovely set. Next, the ranking, everyone's favorite part of these sorts of things. At number 1, I think Final Fantasy is a pretty nice set to choose. It was really balanced, it was really fun, there was a lot of depth, and the cards just all felt pretty fun to play. There wasn't really any deck super lagging behind. Red-green was definitely a bit worse, but other than that, all the other archetypes were quite good, so 9 out of 10, you're pretty happy with that. And overall, you could still play red-green sometimes just play the red-green cards. Overall, a really fun set, really good balance, and a nice success. Next up, I'm going to put Avatar. I thought this set was really well made as well. There were some rares that were quite powerful in this set, but rares in general have been getting better and better, so that just seems like a sort of thing that's going to happen in sets these days. But I thought the mechanics were a home run. I thought that the balance was really, really nice, and I thought that there was a lot of really like solid decks that you could play. Coming up right on its heels, Tarkir Dragonstorm. I think Tarkir is an awesome set, an awesome plane, and I think that this one kind of did what you want from Tarkir. There wasn't as much diversity in the decks that you could play. It was kind of turned by the end of the format into red-white versus multicolor. But within multicolor, building those decks was a lot of interesting things, and you could sometimes build an off-meta deck and find some success as well. And also, I mean, it's a set that's built around kind of being multicolor, so it kind of achieved its intended purpose. If you couldn't build a multicolor deck in Tarkir when the set is kind of built around playing these different color combinations, then it would be kind of a set that you weren't that necessarily happy with. But this one had a lot of good gameplay to it and really fun. Next was Edge of Eternities. Not a bad set, not crazy good, but I think this is definitely just like kind of close with Tarkir Dragonstorm. They're both solid sets. Edge of Eternities definitely had some good mechanics, was pretty solid, fun to play, good balance. There was a couple of decks lagging behind, like red-white, as I mentioned. Black-green also wasn't the best in that format, but usually formats are going to have 1 or 2 things that miss because designing sets is complicated, and overall a pretty good set. Next up is Ether Drift. This set just kind of whiffed because one of its main mechanics, which was start your engines, was a little bit hard to use. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment in the wins and fails, but basically it was an okay format. It ended up being a late game format, which meant that there was a lot of decks that were discounted or ones that you didn't really want to play, but overall still had some solid gameplay. And then last by a mile was Spider-Man. This set was just kind of a fail. This was not very popular for good reason because it just wasn't a successful format. The cards weren't really well, like the archetypes weren't really well balanced. There were only 5 of them to choose from. It ended up in a pick 2 draft format, which just wasn't a very fun way to play, I felt, because you didn't really get as many signal points with which to determine whether the archetype you were trying to draft was open. There were only 4 people in your pod, so if you happened to have the same archetype as somebody else in your pod, you got really wrecked because there was less cards open, so you were splitting the cards for your archetype with one other player, and since there were only 5 archetypes to choose from, that was going to happen a decent percentage of the time, and there wasn't always a ton that you could do about that. And overall, just not a very successful format, though, as of course I said before, I don't want to harp on it too much because there were a lot of good things this year. Next up, end of year awards. First up, the commons. Honorable mention going to White Auracite and Firebending Lesson. White Auracite being a great removal spell that also ramps you, so almost being a 2-for-1 in that sense, because it's a removal spell and also like a land. That card was really scary to see on turn 4 or even any stage in the game, especially because there were some artifact synergies in that set and some good ways to spend your mana. Firebending Lesson also gets an honorable mention. Just the best version of this effect we've ever seen, I think. 1 mana deal 2, 5 mana deal 5. It was a lesson. There were synergies with that. And overall, just a fantastic removal spell. But at number 1, Sibzig Appraiser. 3 mana, 2/1. When it enters, look at the top 2 cards of your library. Put 1 into your hand, the other into your graveyard. Just a lot, like the 2-for-1s attached to a relevant body are just really good. This one gets you some card selection even. There were some graveyard synergies in this set as well. That wasn't the key part of the card though. It was just really good to get a 2-for-1, get a 2/1 body that could trade with things, pressure your opponent, and that's coming in at number 1. Next up are the uncommons. We've got honorable mention Glacier Godmaw. This felt like a mythic rare in some games where your opponent would play this, immediately sacrifice a lander token, or immediately play a land, then sacrifice a lander token, and then all of their creatures were just giant vigilant hasters and the game would just be over. And this was a giant trampler. If they played this and then got to untap, they basically won every time. It is a 7-drop, which means it does have less, like is a little bit limited in that capacity because you can't always play your 7-drops. But the fact that it just basically ended the game like so many times and just felt so powerful is why I put it here as an honorable mention. That next is an honorable mention is Invasion Submersible. Just Mana War getting a giant boost. Mana War, of course, being a 3 mana 2/2 that bounces a creature to its owner's hand. And Invasion Submersible just being like the spiritual successor, being coming from the depths of the ocean to bounce things, and just being basically a 3 mana 3/3 that bounces a non-land permanent was just really, really strong. Waterbending 3 to exhaust and make this a 3/3 creature was relatively trivial because there were just a lot, like, because it's an artifact itself, you basically only needed to have 2 mana or 2 other things to tap, so you're almost always attacking with this the following turn or blocking with it. And then at number 1, Dragoon's Lance. Doesn't look like much, but a 2 mana 2/1 flyer that in the late game turns any of your creature into a +1/+0 and giving it flying during your turn is just devastating because it's going to hit for like 6 damage on its own when it comes down on turn 2, if not more. And then as soon as they kill the 1/1 token, you're just like, any of your creatures are a must-answer threat. And that's just really problematic for a 2 mana play, especially when equipments were a synergy in this format and artifacts were a synergy in this format. And so overall, Dragoon's Lance coming in as the number 1 uncommon. Next up are the rares. Things are getting intense here. As honorable mentions, we have Fire Nation Drill, 4 mana for an artifact vehicle that when it enters, you can tap it to destroy a creature with power 4 or less, and then it has a crew. It's a 6/3 trampler. It's a giant. This card was just incredibly hard to beat. You play your 4-drop, then your opponent plays a Fire Nation Drill, kills your 4-drop, and you're just like so far behind because not only did it kill your creature, it's then going to be very easy to crew and just absolutely destroy you for 6 damage a turn. Really tough card to beat. Fire Nation Drill is fantastic. Another honorable mention, also a vehicle, Lumbering Worldwagon. When this card came down on turn 3, it felt almost impossible to win because your opponent would then cast a 5-drop the following turn. Most 5-drop creatures were able to get that crew 4, which is pretty high, but still, they would crew 4, attack, and then immediately get another land, and so they're hitting you for 6 damage, and they're going to have 6 mana available, if not 7 if they're hitting land drops the following turn, because you have turn 3, play it, enters, gets a 4th land, turn 4, you play a land, play a 5-drop, attack with Lumbering Worldwagon, get your 6th land into play, and if they don't kill the Lumbering Worldwagon, which sometimes they couldn't deal with a 6/4 creature on turn 4 attacking because maybe they don't have a 4/1 like creature or whatever to block, then Lumbering Worldwagon just takes over. Just a giant creature, giant threat, really scary on turn 3. But the number 1 rare, Meringue River Regent. Generally, you were playing this as the dragon mode, as a 4 blue, 6/7 flyer. When it enters, return up to 2 other target non-land permanents to their owner's hands. Just basically reset your opponent's board state and add a 6/7 flyer was so hard to beat. And you even have the backup mode for Omen, Coil, and Catch. Draw 3, discard a card, and then shuffle this card into its owner's library. So Meringue River Regent gets that number 1 slot for rares. This card was absolutely messed up. Moving on to the mythics, the final ranking we're doing here, the honorable mentions of Sabsunin Luxa Embodied, 5 mana, 6/6 reach, trample, indestructible. Luckily, it can't attack or block unless it has an even number of counters on it, so it would come into play, couldn't do anything, like it could block and the stuff like that the turn it came down, and then at the beginning of your first main phase, you'd put a counter, and then if it had an odd number, you'd draw 2 cards. So you would draw 2 cards, and then attack them with a giant reach, trample, indestructible, and then you draw 2 cards, and attack with a giant reach, trample, indestructible. If you had the ability to put counters on it with something else, it was just game over even faster. This card was super messed up, and it only cost 5 mana, which is just insane to think about. There's also Rise of Sozin, which was another fantastic mythic. 4 black, destroy all creatures was the first mode. Then you choose a card name, search your opponent's hand, graveyard, and library for 4 cards with that name and exile them. So sometimes you could nab a card from their hand, and then you would exile it, and it would come back to play as Firelord Sozin, which basically ends the game if it hits them, because it just brings back all of their creatures, which is just absolutely insane. It's a 5 mana, 5/5 menace, firebending 3. So just really, really strong card, Rise of Sozin. Almost impossible to beat when your opponent plays that one, because it clears the board and then provides like a must-answer threat. And then at number 1, Ugin, Eye of Storms. 7 mana for a 7 loyalty planeswalker. When you cast it, you exile a permanent that's 1 or more colors, so just get a removal spell. You can immediately +2 it to gain 3 life and draw a card. If you ever play another colorless spell, you can exile another permanent. There weren't that many colorless spells in this set that you'd play for Tarkir Dragonstorm, but there were enough that you would get value from that, and then you could eventually you would just draw enough cards that you would win the game. It was really hard to deal with a 9 loyalty planeswalker. And the ultimate didn't really do a ton, but you didn't really need that too, because you didn't have tons of colorless cards, but you were just drawing 2 cards a turn, and you were gaining 3 life a turn, so you had time to use those cards. And the fact that this was colorless is really what pushes it into the number 1 slot, because like any deck except the most dedicated red-white aggro deck could use this card and just absolutely maul opponents with it. Moving on to the wins and fails. Some of them have already come up a little bit during the course of this video, but let's highlight them. First up, win, Exhaust. This was a really innovative mechanic from Ether Drift, and it might not seem that innovative, but there have been activated abilities on Magic cards for a long, long time, but limiting them to be only able to activate it once really opened up a lot of design space, because you have a card like Stampeding Scurryfoot, where if this ability was just usable as much as you wanted, you would end up in game situations where just the best thing you could do every turn was activate your Stampeding Scurryfoot. It's not that interesting of a design, and you just have your Scurryfoot, you just activate it. If your opponent doesn't kill it immediately, you just win the game, and in the late game, you can maybe activate it twice. Like, if that was an ability, you would just never see a design like Stampeding Scurryfoot. But because you have this Exhaust ability, so you can only use it once, you end up in a situation where you have a very interesting card where you have the tension of, oh, do I want to activate my Stampeding Scurryfoot and use that ability while I make sure my Scurryfoot hasn't died? Or do I want to play a different card that's maybe more powerful for 4 mana and save that ability for later because I only get to do it once? There were some interesting things. Maybe you could like bounce it to your hand or bring it back and then use the ability again, things like that. But basically, Stampeding Scurryfoot, pretty cool design, like an example of what Exhaust could do. And we've seen a couple of other Exhaust cards going forward, and I think it's just a really good mechanic and really definitely a win from this year. I'm definitely always a fan of good mechanics. Bit of a fail though, Start Your Engines, and specifically the max speed part of Start Your Engines, which was an aspect of that thing, of that mechanic. So a card like Goblin Surveyor, which has Start Your Engines, you start your speed at 1, it increases when an opponent loses life, max speed is 4. It only cares about you having max speed, which I think just meant there was a lot of missed design space, because a card like Point the Way, which was a really bad card in this format, just for the record, I think it's interesting because it has Start Your Engines, and then when you pay the 4 mana, you get basic land cards based on your speed. And so it doesn't care about you getting all the way up to max speed. And I think that's a very interesting design space where it's not just on or off. It's not just, oh, I have max speed and my card is good, and I don't have max speed and my card is kind of bad. I think this kind of midpoint was like an area for exploration that they didn't really use that much. And there was definitely a lot more, I think, space there of things they could do where like, oh, scry X, where X is your speed, or things like that. Where it's not like game breaking whether you have max speed or don't have max speed. It's just like a nice little boost, because a card like Goblin Surveyor without max speed is just like horrific. It's like okay-ish if you do have max speed, but there was a lot of cards that were kind of like that, and that's one of the reasons why the format was a little bit tricky, because a lot of the aggressive decks had some cards like this where if you got to max speed they were really good, and if you didn't they were kind of a fail. And so I think that's a mechanic that I kind of wish that we had either seen more of the cards that cared about you getting intermediate levels of speed, maybe cards that more like reward you when you like up your speed by 1, like when you gain a speed, scry 1, or if you already have max speed, then you get to scry unlimited times, or like not unlimited times, but like you scry like every turn if you have like max speed. But I think that just the idea of max speed and the idea of not really, the space wasn't really used the way I wanted it to be used. Next is a win. I think Mobilize was a really cool mechanic from Tarkir Dragonstorm. There's not as many aggressive mechanics because like your creature has to be able to attack, you have to be able to do stuff while attacking, and if you can't attack, the mechanic is useless. But I think a card like Dalkovin Pack Beast was really cool because the card itself doesn't have any power, but when it attacks for 3 and makes 3 tokens. There's good uses for those tokens. I think the mechanic was really interesting. There were some, like, it made it kind of tricky to play certain kinds of decks because any 1 toughness creature that couldn't block these mobilized tokens was a bit of a liability. But generally, I thought that it was a cool mechanic. It had some cards that cared about creatures entering, some cards that cared about creatures dying, some things that cared about tokens. Overall, I think it was a pretty cool mechanic, and I think that was a nice little win. I think that's a fun mechanic. Next win, Return to Tarkir. I love seeing the return to classic Magic Plains. I thought that they did the Return to Tarkir very well. There was kind of the aspect you were hoping to see. You saw some nostalgia cards like Skirmish Rhino being an homage to Siege Rhino. You saw like cool like dragon cards like Sonic Shrieker, Glacial Dragon Hunt was cool. Like lots of multicolored things. I thought that the like way that they designed like a card like Glacial Dragon Hunt was really cool as well because it could fit into the Teamer decks as a blue-red card, but also the Jeskai decks as a blue-red card. And it was a non-creature card for Jeskai decks that could help you cast 2 spells in a turn, which Jeskai cared about, and it had Harmonize, which kind of worked well with some of the Teamer things. Overall, I thought that this was a really cool design set. And then a card like Sonic Shrieker, which gave you like a nice little dragon payoff if you were willing to dip into black for your red-white decks, or you could maybe play it in your 5-color dragons deck. There were just like a lot of cool designs. I thought the Return to Tarkir was very well done. And overall, like as you saw in my ranking, it was my favorite of the in-universe Magic sets. Definitely really close with Avatar as well. It's not like just because it's a linear ranking doesn't mean like that there's like a giant gap between all of the sets. Next win, Warp. This was a mechanic from Edge of Eternities. I thought this was really successfully done. It was just very interesting because it gave a lot of interesting design space. There were some simple ones where it was like, okay, if I have the mana, I'll warp it. Otherwise, I'll just cast it. But a card like Codebreaker Hound was really cool because in some situations, you're like, ooh, do I get greedy and warp this card to get the extra value? Or do I just cast it normally because the warp cost wasn't actually a discount? Or with a card like Timeline Color, it's like, ooh, I could warp this on turn 1 and have both of us start out the game at 2 life points lower. Is that beneficial for me? Am I on the play? Am I being an aggressive deck? What do I think my role is in the matchup? I thought that was a really cool little thing that they did with the warp cards. Some of them in particular have some really cool designs like that. Next up was a fail, Pick 2 Draft. I did not like Pick 2 Draft. I thought that it really limited the amount of things you could do in the draft. It gave you like way less signal points. The archetypes, I'm just putting these 2 cards on the board because green-white was a good archetype in the Spider-Man set. But just like strong multicolored cards and then also hybrid mana cards are kind of weird in Pick 2 Draft because you want to take the strong multicolored draft so you can build around it, but you also want to take the hybrid card because you don't know which lane is going to be open. But reading signals is also really hard in Pick 2 Draft because you get like half as many signal points as in a normal draft. And also like if the person you're passing to is just bad at reading signals and ends up in the same deck as you, then you're in trouble no matter what. I mean, it's going to be bad in normal draft, but in normal draft, you have like a pot of 8 players. So if 2 players are in the same archetype, that can still be okay for you. But in Pick 2 Draft, if 2 players are in the same archetype, then there's only 5 archetypes to choose from. So that happens a decent percentage of the time. And you just end up in a spot where you're just in trouble. And it's not really a great feeling. So Pick 2 Draft, definitely a bit of a fail. And something that I hope they can work on moving forward. If they are going to do it, I don't think that maybe this was the approach to do. I think having 5 archetypes, I mean, it's hard because they want to play a 4-person draft format. So having 8 archetypes is just a lot of archetypes for that, but I don't know. It was not my biggest, I'm not a big fan of Pick 2 Draft. Win, Avatar Mechanics. I really wanted to highlight this once more. I think they did a great job. Waterbend, I didn't get to show it on the Avatar slide, but Waterbend, it was like you could pay with your artifacts or creatures to help. So things like clue tokens that gain extra relevance. Do you want to sack the clue token, keep it around? Do you want to have like an equipment in play? Because the equipments, you could basically tap them for free because equipments do the same thing whether they're tapped or not. Waterbend was really cool with a card like North Pole Patrol. Earth Kingdom General has a good like little Earthbend thing. If you put counters on the things, you get to gain some life. The Earthbend cards were cool because you could either Earthbend stack up onto one land, or you could Earthbend like spread out your Earthbends so you have a bunch of smaller lands. I thought that was really cool. Fire Nation Cadets and Firebending was really nice as well. Firebend was like, how can I use this mana in a way that's not just for the activated ability, which I thought was really cool. As I already said with Mobilize and the Dalkovin Pack Beasts, like from Tarkir Dragonstorm, I think these aggressive mechanics are really interesting because you don't want your card to be useless if you are behind, but at the same time, like you don't want it to be too overwhelming if you're on the front foot. And I think this was a nice little balance because if you do find a way to use that mana, you're pretty pleased. And then airbending was really nice as well, just like kind of a bounce spell, but you could use it on your own things because it makes it cheaper and you didn't feel that bad about it. But if you bounce your opponent's thing, it could clear away a blocker, just like a nice little tempo-y mechanic. I thought that was really well done. Moving on to some hopes for 2026 as we close this video. First, balance. I think the sets that are the best are generally the ones that are the most balanced, the ones that have good archetypes from a variety of things. And so I think that things like Final Fantasy, where they were very well balanced, definitely a plus. And so I'm hoping for balance in 2026. I think that there were some archetype misses in this year, specifically some of the red-white decks missed when they tried to be about something that wasn't aggressive. And I think that's definitely something to work on in the future, but balance is something I hope for in 2026. Next, interesting mechanics. I think they did a really good job, as I highlighted in some of the wins and fails, with interesting mechanics in 2025, and it just shows that they kind of keep finding design space, because you'd think there's been so many Magic sets made that they'd have to start repeating mechanics more, which isn't always bad. Like, having a returning mechanic can be fun, but they keep finding new innovative mechanics, and I hope they keep that going forward in 2026. There's also new archetypes as a hope. They keep trying to push the envelope. They keep trying new things, like a red-white deck that cares about stationing vehicle or stationing spacecrafts or things like that. I think those are like interesting things to try. They don't always work, but I like that they keep pushing the envelope, and I hope that they do keep trying to build new archetypes, because it is kind of nice when you have something that's like, oh, blue-red isn't just about casting spells. Green-white isn't just about +1/+1 counters or things like that. I think those are always interesting when you have some of those more unique archetypes, or like black-green isn't just about the graveyard. They keep trying new things, and I think new archetypes is a hope for 2026. There's a lot of different sets, and so hopefully they'll have some nice variety in the gameplay for the color combinations. Next, well-made Universes Beyond. I think Universes Beyond sets, there's a lot of them coming in 2026. We really are hoping for more avatars and Final Fantasies and not Spider-Mans, because the Spider-Man set was definitely, it was just not a good experience overall. And Avatar and Final Fantasy were, I think, quite positive experiences, especially Final Fantasy was a beloved set. People loved that one. And I think that if we could just do that with the Universes Beyond, that would be really, really nice for the game. And then the final hope, fix Pick 2 Draft. I don't know how you would fix Pick 2 Draft. I think there's some problems with just the format in general, but I think maybe the hybrid mana cards were maybe a little bit like too cutesy, because they just give so much flexibility that it's like you almost have to take them, or like the multicolored cards being super pushed, so you like feel like you have to take them, but then you know you can't play them. I think that's kind of like how Pick 2 Draft kind of ends up being kind of a samey, kind of tough format to play. Or just don't make Pick 2 Draft a format. Just play the sets normally. That would be my bigger hope. But if they are going to do Pick 2 Draft, hopefully they do it with a set that they actually designed from the get-go to be built around this, instead of Spider-Man, which was kind of last minute. These are the sets coming up in 2026. First up, we've got Lorwyn Eclipsed. It's an in-universe Magic set. Looking forward to seeing how this one plays out. Haven't been back to Lorwyn in quite some time, but this is going to be a format that I think is quite popular. Magic players tend to like in-universe sets, and I think Lorwyn is going to be a nice little good way to kick off the year. Next is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. From what I've heard, this is a set that is maybe a smaller set, so maybe does have Pick 2 Draft. We'll see if they've learned from what Spider-Man was. It's also a very jarring setting for Magic. It's not something like Lord of the Rings, not like The Hobbit, which we'll get to in a moment, where it's not really magic-y in its very nature, so we'll see how they do with the designs, see how they make these cards. One benefit of this, compared to something like a Marvel superhero set, which we will get to in a moment as well, is that it will be on Arena, so you don't have two different versions of the cards, which is definitely a win. Next, Secrets of Strixhaven. The first Strixhaven was a pretty solid set. It was a 5 archetype set, which is always interesting. There weren't when you ever have a 5 archetype set for a full set, it does lead to interesting drafts, especially because the archetypes aren't always well balanced, red white in particular. Again, that was the time where they tried to make red white about getting cards exiled from your graveyard instead of just being an aggressive deck, and that definitely played out in a kind of weaker manner than some of the other archetypes. But Secrets of Strixhaven going to be nice to go back to a plane that had some pretty cool flavor. Next, Marvel Superheroes. This is going to be another set where the cards on Arena are different from the cards in paper. Not really looking forward to that, but this is going to actually be a full set, so they're going to actually have 10 draft archetypes, things like that. They're actually using the top 8 of this Pro Tour as a draft format, because that makes sure they highlight the superheroes cards, and that's going to be really interesting to see draft as the top 8 of a Pro Tour. Looking forward to that. And also just hopefully they can do a good job with making a Marvel set that actually is popular with fans, because Spider-Man was not that. And I like it when Magic sets are successful, even though I think that the fact that they don't have the digital rights is kind of annoying. Next up is The Hobbit. I'm super excited for this set. I do hear that it might be a bit of a smaller set. Hopefully it's still designed for normal draft, but if it's Pick 2 Draft, hopefully they have designed it with that in mind, so it's more successful than the Spider-Man set. And The Hobbit is my favorite book, or one of my favorite books. It's super good. I'm really excited to see what they do with the characters. I thought they nailed it with Lord of the Rings, and I think The Hobbit is going to be, or at least from a card design perspective, they're going to do a good job based on how they did with Lord of the Rings. Really excited for that set. Reality Fracture, don't know a ton about this set. They've kind of kept it a little bit of an enigma, but I think it's got something to do with math, which maybe means that there'll be some cool, complex mechanics to build around. Not much to know about it, but it's another in-universe set. So you see there's 3 in-universe sets and then 4 Universes Beyond sets. But from my understanding is that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and The Hobbit, and maybe even the Star Trek set, are a little bit smaller. But that's just a little bit of speculation from things that I've heard in the rumor mill or whatever. But Reality Fracture going to be a nice in-universe set to kind of close down in-universe sets for the year, and then finishing things off with Star Trek. Star Trek is a franchise that is very popular, so there will be a lot of very opinionated folks on the card designs. Hopefully they have those people within the building who help design this set, and I think that if they do have those folks involved, it could be a successful set. But we'll have to see how they actually do. I don't know as much about Star Trek other than the basics, but maybe I'll dive in before that just to get a better sense for things. But I'm hoping that these sets are all going to be pretty nice. Anyway, that's going to do it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you made it to the end of the video, leave hashtag good year in the comment section down below, because I think overall it was certainly a good year for draft, and I'm hoping 2026 is an even better one. That's going to do it for this one, though. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you next time.